Okay. Hey folks, today we're going to make homemade pita bread, which is a really good introduction into baking with yeast. It's a total of 6 steps, and that includes proofing, shaping, baking. And it will take a minimum of about an hour and a half from beginning to end, so relatively quick in regards to yeast risen doughs. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to activate the yeast. This is freeze-dried yeast or instant yeast. And so the way that we want to activate and wake up this yeast is to use water as hot as we can get it from our tap, which should be more than fine. So what I have already measured out in the bowl is some honey. Granulated sugar can be used as well. Proportions for that alteration will be included in the recipe. That's just a food source for the yeast. So I'm adding the hot water to the honey. It's already measured out. And I am adding the freeze-dried yeast. And typically, what most instructions call for when working with instant yeast is after you hydrate your yeast in hot water, you wait 5 minutes and it's active enough to use. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes it could be 8 or 10 minutes. So I'm just going to show you what the yeast will look like when it is active enough to use for this recipe or for any recipe that you're using instant yeast for. The yeast is completely active and ready to use at this point. And the indicator of that is, you can see how, look at the opacity, where you can't actually see any of the water, and the surface isn't completely flat because of all the CO2 that's given off as a byproduct of the active yeast. So I'm just going to stir it a little bit so you can see what that looks like. A consistent foam that forms all the way on the top. What we're going to do now is we're going to add our hydrated active yeast with some water and honey to the bowl with the rest of our dry ingredients. And we're going to mix it as is for a couple of minutes just to get it going before we add the rest of our water. So whenever mixing bread dough, we always use this attachment that's referred to as the dough hook, and we always mix on low speed. And the reason why we mix on low speed is because we want to develop the gluten that gives flour. It's the protein in flour that gives it its elasticity. And we don't want to tear those gluten strands by mixing at too high a speed. That's why when working with bread dough, we always mix at low speed. And we always use a dough hook. So at this point, I'm going to shut the machine off. I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of olive oil before adding the rest of our water. And so the water is doing a couple things. It's hydrating the flour, and additionally, with the machine running, it's allowing us to develop the gluten to get a nice proof and develop those stretchy qualities that happens to gluten when it becomes hydrated and undergoes manipulation of the machine. So now I'm going to shut off the machine and tilt back the mixer head and see if I can briefly and gently touch it without it sticking, which I can do. So at this point, all we have to do is put this dough into a separate bowl, separate clean bowl, and allow it to proof to the point where that quantity doubles in volume. And that With this dough, that generally takes about 1 hour. A really good tool to have is, this is referred to as a bowl scraper, and water is a really good lubricant. So if you get your dough scraper, your bowl scraper wet, dough comes out of and off of things really easily. You can see how that just took everything out really easy. So now I'm just going to cover this bowl with plastic wrap and let it proof until it doubles in volume. At this point, our pita dough has doubled in volume. It's completely proofed, and now we're going to divide it into portion-sized balls and allow those portion-sized balls to proof once again and take approximately 30 minutes, maybe a little bit less. But you can see at this point what the dough looks like when it's completely proof. It's considerably wetter, very soft, and you can see all the air pockets created by the CO2 in that dough. So the first thing I'm going to do is, with a hand sifter, just put some flour on this baking sheet. That it's not going to get baked on this. We're going to put our portioned balls of dough to reproof for a second time on there. So again, I'm going to use my bowl scraper after getting it wet with water to lubricate it. It'll come right out very easily. If you don't have a bench scraper, you can always use a knife to do this if you prefer. And you can cut these portion-sized balls into any size that you prefer. After portioning them, what you want to do is fold them in on themselves, like so. And then on an area of your work surface that doesn't have any flour, you turn it upside down, and with a cupped hand, you rotate it. And since there is no flour on the surface, it allows it to stick slightly and close up that seam on the bottom. And that way you get a nice proof because it's all contained, no imperfections or cracks or holes in it. After the pita balls are shaped, you just add a little bit of flour to the tops. And now that way it'll keep the towel from sticking as you put over it. And so this will be about 30 minutes. The final step for this pita dough, it's completely proofed. We're going to roll these out into discs and bake them off. So a good indicator of when these are done proofing for their second time after portioning, this applies to a lot of different breads, is if you poke it with your finger, it should hold that fingerprint for at least 30 seconds before puffing back out. Bread that's underproofed, what's going to happen is immediately it's going to push back out because the yeast is still active, still consuming carbohydrates in the flour and releasing a lot of CO2. So given that it's holding a fingerprint there for a minute or so, that tells us that we're in a good place here and we're ready to start rolling out our pita dough and then baking it off. So with a rolling pin, a floured surface, a little bit of flour on our hands, just take one, flatten it out a little bit, and we want to roll them out to approximately 1/4 of an inch thick. You can make any size pitas you'd like, but you want to keep the thickness consistent. To baking off the pita, the hotter the oven, the better. In this case, I can get my oven to between 450 and 475, but if you can get your oven up to 500, even 600 degrees Fahrenheit, just get it as hot as you can. The pitas are rolled out and ready to go. I happen to have a piece of cast iron in there to use as a baking stone. If you don't have a baking stone, you can use an inverted sheet pan like this. Also works fine. The stone is not crucial to these coming out well, although it's helpful. They're going to take about 4 minutes. What's going to happen is they're going to puff up almost to a complete ball shape, and then after that happens, you're still going to take a minute or so. When you get a little bit of practice and experience with them, you'll be able to determine very quickly when they're completely done. So I'm going to open the oven. I'm going to do 2 at a time. So these pitas are done, just come out of the oven. And what you want to do is you want to layer them out like this, shingle them out, and then cover them with a towel. And let them cool down that way. That way they don't develop a lot of cracks and dry out. A little bit of steam that is trapped by the towel will help them retain some moisture and not crack. Well, this is our final product here, our pita bread. And I'm going to break one open so you can see the interior. Nice pocket, nice interior structure. And that's it, nice and easy. Homemade pita bread. If you like this class, please press like. If there's anything else you'd like to learn, please let us know and we'll do our best to make that happen for you. For equipment needs, you can check out Amazon. This is a great knife that's been in my repertoire for years. It's a Misono knife. You can find it on Amazon. Also all the other essential tools hand sifters, rolling pins, bowl scrapers, bench scrapers, and anything else. All of this stuff is available for you on Amazon Marketplace. So it's a one area where you can find all the things that you would need to bake any of these recipes. Thank you.